welcome and good morning. Welcome to the session. Before I start the session, I hope everyone has a Gmail account or and Google account. If not, please set up a Gmail account because we would be using Google Colab for the hands-on tutorial. Uh, if you can't, no need to worry. I will share all the resources at the end of the session and also during the session, so you can go through it later on also. Let me share my screen. Okay. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. How do I take this? Yeah. So I work for Fussel, and how can okay. Yeah. So I work for Fussel, and Fussel is an agri-tech startup, and it's a pioneer in precision farming in India. We are an IoT-based, AI-based, AIT powered platform, and we provide very precise, and by precise I mean very farm specific, crop stage specific advisory to horticultural farmers. So this is like a version of our device. We have recently launched the version 4 called Fasal Kranti, and that's like the main hardware that we use to collect data from the field. That's about Fasal, but one major vision of Fasal is also to close this gap between tech and agriculture. And I hope through this session, this whole concept of computer vision and how we can use that for plant disease classification, that's like the main objective of this session. We would have a hands-on tutorial on some deep learning and neural network approach to do plant disease classification. But the main objective is for you to understand the fundamentals of computer vision, the difference between machine learning and deep learning, the fundamentals of neural network. I would introduce you to Keras and Google Colab. And then there will be a tutorial on apple leaf disease classification. And then I have some other resources like how you can take what you learned from this session further, even if you have no plan to ever get hands on this field of computer vision. At least if you ever work in collaboration with someone where AI is being used, it will be good to be familiar with these topics. So let's start the session. Okay, so in an abstract level, the main goal of computer vision is to take image data and infer something important out of it. So it could be like face recognition that most of us you might have on your phone or laptop, or say smart driving. That's where computer vision is also used. It's actually a subfield of AI and machine learning, and this subfield is called deep learning. I will be talking more about it, but before, suppose this is a very classic image problem that whenever anybody gets started on computer vision, that's like one of the classic problem that people solve is like, you are given a handwritten digit from 0 to 9, and the computer has to classify, like, so in this case it is 8. So when you see the image, you see it as 8, but what computer sees is a matrix of this whole pixel. So suppose this is a 50 by 50 grayscale image, then the computer sees it as it's as a though this is rectangular, I'm not sure exactly the pixel size, but for computer vision, you usually pass on a square matrix. So if you have an image that is not square, then resize it. So let's suppose it's 50 by 50, then this is what the computer sees and tries to classify, like these numbers that you see, and these numbers varies from 0 to 255. If it is a colored image, then there are three channels, one for red, blue, and green. So there will be three such arrays or matrix that the computer will look into, and based on that array and classify, it will try to classify or identify what that image is. Now the thing is, we, as I mentioned, that for computer vision we use deep learning. The reason being, for machine learning, one major limitation is that the feature extraction has to be done manually. So I pass on an image, somebody, some data scientist or someone will sit and extract all the important features that is required. So suppose this is a diseased tomato leaf. Uh, Now, as I mentioned, like if you have a 50 by 50 image, then you have 2,500 features. Imagine extracting features out of those 2,500, and there are different, same feature could be like, used in different version. Like it could be the square. Suppose your variable is x1, then it could be one feature could be x1 square or x1 cube. So there is no limit how many features you could use. So that becomes a very tedious task. You can still use machine learning for image classification, but it will become very tedious. Whereas for deep learning, the feature extraction happens automatically. That's the beauty of deep learning. And that's why for computer vision, mostly deep learning is being used. So, a basic fundamental of deep learning is neural network. That's what all the deep learning algorithms are based on. They are a different version of these neural networks. They have different architecture. So, what exactly is a neural network? So, the neural network, the design comes from how a human brain functions. But unlike a human brain, like this is not a biological process. This is called mathematical equations. So for example, if you have all these input features, so as I mentioned, like if you have a 50 by 50 pixel, then you have 2,500 features here. So then we could input all those 2,500 values, assign weight to each of those features, and then pass on a bias, and we can calculate an input. And if you see closely, this equation is very similar to a linear, what you see in a linear regression. So the bias is nothing but the coefficient that you see in a linear equation, and these weights are assigned to each feature. So this value, so this is your input layer, and this is like that information is passed on to the next layer, and this value that is determined is actually a single neuron. The term, as I said, it because this whole architecture is based upon how the human brain functions. So the terminology for it is neuron. But the difference for neural network is that there is an additional activation function which determines whether this neuron needs to be activated and the information needs to be passed on to the next layer. So here the next layer is actually the output. So this activation function is what differentiate your deep learning or a neural network from your general linear or logistic regression. We will be talking about each of these in detail in the next few slides. So, to begin with, what are weights and biases? So, weights are, they determine the effectiveness of a particular input or a feature. So, higher the weight associated with a feature, the more impact that feature will have on the network and the final output. It's the same thing that you see in a linear regression, that the weights that we assign to a feature, the higher weight means that particular feature will have a higher impact on your final output. Whereas bias is an additional parameter that is used to adjust the final output. If there is no bias, then all the equations, like all the this previous equation, sorry, the previous equation will start from zero, because this is a equation for a linear line. So all the value will start from zero. But in real life, we do not see that. We don't see that. For example, a classic example, let's see housing price, the price of a house. It determines what area it is located, how big the house is, how many, square footage, what kind of material, how many bedrooms and bathrooms are there. But even if you have a house with, the minimum of everything, the value would never be zero. In real life, you don't see a cost of something being actually zero. It has some starting price. How costly it could be can depend on a lot of market demand and other features. So that's what bias does. It adds this additional parameter that kind of adjusts the final output. The next thing we have is activation function. So as I did mention that activation function is what separates a neural network from a general linear and logistic regression. What activation function usually does is take that entire input, that equation that I shared, including bias and weights, and then using different sort of function, it then limits that value output from 0 to 1 or -1 to 1, where a positive value means that the neuron is activated. That's why the name activation function. And what I mean by a neuron is activated is that the informations that this neuron has will be passed on to the next layer. So there are many types of activation functions. I'm showing here 6, but I think there are 8 activation functions. A very sigmoid was one of the oldest activation function that was used for a long time. But now recently it is this ReLU, which is rectified linear unit. That's the activation function that is being used. They have ReLU has each activation function has its own advantage and disadvantage, but for the sake of this session, it's not required to know in details about the how these functions actually mathematically, what's the mathematics behind it. So the next thing is the previous example I showed, actually it was a shallow network. If a neural network only has one hidden layer, then we call it a shallow network. If it has more than one hidden layer, we call it a deep neural network. So the name hidden layer is a bit confusing. It's not that this layer is hidden. You When you design a neural network, you do get to see how many layers you have. It's just that in the input layer you and in the output layer, so when you train a neural network, you can see the data that you get. You do see all the input values, the x values, and you see all the output values, the y values. And these in between layers, those values are not available in your data. That's why the name hidden layer. So in this case, you have an input layer and you have 2 hidden layers. So you will have 3 sets of weights: one from input layer to hidden layer, then hidden layer to the second hidden layer, and then finally the last layer to the output layer. So you will have these all different kind of weights and biases here. Now the question is, how does actually we went through the weights, the biases, the activation function, but how does a neural network actually learns? uh, so there are 2 parts of the neural network. One is this forward pass, where the data you move from the input layer to the output layer, and then there is a back propagation where you move back from the output layer to the input layer. So what happens initially? Random weights and say a bias of 0 is assigned to the input layer, all the inputs that you provide. And based on the neural architecture you define in the beginning, suppose I have said, I need 2 layers and each layer will have 3 neurons. Random weights are assigned here in this layer, and an output is calculated. Now, that output is used and matched with the actual y value. So, this is, say, the first iteration, y predicted. value is calculated, and then that is compared with the actual value using a loss function. Now, loss function could be different. It could be as simple as an error, which is like your y actual minus y predicted, or it could be a absolute error where you take the absolute value between the difference between the y actual and y predicted. If it's a classification problem, then it is the likelihood that what is the likelihood of that y predicted is equal to y actual. So there are different kind of loss function, and you decide the loss function based on your what exactly you are trying to calculate, based on the output that you want to see. So once you determine the loss function, so the back propagation happens, and the idea behind the back propagation is to adjust all the weights and the biases to minimize this loss function. And suppose if you have 1,000 examples, 1,000 such data points, then this will be done for all the 1,000 data points, and it's a generalized approach. It wouldn't go and try to minimize it for one example. It will try to minimize the loss function for all the examples you have provided, so that any, and that's the beauty of deep learning network, this neural network. uh, what the advantage of is that, like, even if you throw some data that is little bit different or unseen from the training data, the neural network still is able to perform pretty well. But the the limitation of a neural network is that it needs huge amount of data to train, and also that it's computationally pretty expensive. If you could see, like, based on the architecture, this is a very simple network, and usually for an image you have, as I mentioned, you have 2,500 or more. If it's a colored image, then 2,500 into 3, 7,500 features. And then if you have, like, millions of such images, then all this will be going through forward, a forward pass and a back propagation and multiple iteration of that. But fortunately, we have now cloud based services available where you can rent a system for much cheaper and do these expensive analysis uh, using deep learning. And that's why you see a rise in AI in recent times. These fundamentals of neural network, these are very old. They are, like, decades old. But it's just like now it's possible for everyone to apply this knowledge and use it for their benefit. So as I mentioned, this is like a basic fundamental of neural network, the different parts of neural network, how it does the calculation. The next thing is, like, when you build a neural network, there are multiple parameters you would have to adjust. And these parameters, it's actually just a permutation and combination, and you keep changing the parameters until you get the best result. So number one is the architecture of neural network, which is like, how many layers do you need, and how many neurons in each layer. And that's a number, it can go up to infinite. But usually nobody builds such a really deep network. But sometimes there are examples where, like, people have built something with 25 layers, 30 layers. The idea is, your number of layers shouldn't be more than the number of features and input data you have. If I have 1,000 examples images, there is no point building something that is 100 layer data neural network. A lot of the information will be lost or will get diluted as we move from deeper into the network. Same with the number of neurons. The number could vary from 0 to 100. Usually, you will see in the tutorial that we try to keep the number of layers in this hidden layer as a multiple of 8, either, like, 16, 32, 64, something like that. And there is no honestly, there is no rule of thumb that how much layers and neurons you should use. As I said, it's the trial and error approach that is applied here. The next hyperparameter is, as I mentioned, that neural network is, it actually optimizes for the loss function to minimize the loss function. So how it optimizes, there are different kind of optimizers. I have shown here there are like some 7, 8 optimizers. Each optimizer does it is a bit different than other. Uh, and then within an optimizer, you have the learning rate. The learning rate is like how fast you want your optimizer to learn and reduce the loss function. So this learning rate, if you have a very high learning rate, there is a good chance you will miss the minima. If you have a very low learning rate, you wouldn't know how many times you have to go back and forth. Like you'd have to do that forward and back propagation before you could reach the minima of the loss function. So it's a good learning rate should be not very low, shouldn't be very high. So sometimes we use a decay rate. The decay rate is like, to begin with, we use a higher learning rate, and we say that after each iteration, decrease or the learning rate should decay at rate X, whatever the decay rate you mention. So that way, by towards the end of your iteration, your learning rate reaches the optimum rate. Any questions till now? I know I've been just going and going, but if there are any questions, just feel free to ask me.
I would like to request a participant. Do you have any queries, please?
Okay.
I think there is none.
Okay. Let's then move forward. The other hyperparameter we have is activation function. As I showed you in the previous slide, there are 7, 8 different kind of activation function. Just to make it easier for you, if you are not sure, then use ReLU. As I mentioned, that ReLU is a very popular activation function. Use ReLU for all your hidden layers. And if you have a regression problem, and I hope everybody understands the difference between regression and classification. If your final output is a number, then that's a regression problem. If your final output is a category, say disease and healthy, then that's a classification problem. So if you have a regression problem, then you can use ReLU for all your activation function, for all your layer. You can use either ReLU or a linear activation function for your last layer before the output layer. But if you have a classification problem, then use ReLU for all your hidden layers and use sigmoid if you have a binary class like diseased and healthy, or you use softmax, which you will see in the tutorial if you have a multi-class classification, because we will have a healthy, scab, rust, and multiple disease. So you have multiple classes there. So you can use sigmoid and softmax just before the output layer. But it's not necessarily that ReLU is always the best choice, but this is just to simplify things. I will also show in the end that if you think there are so many hyperparameters, so many permutation combination, there is a trick using coding. You can just write a script to just automate this whole hyperparameter selection. We will see that at the end of the session. The other 2 hyperparameters is batch size. So batch size is like, suppose I have millions of training data, millions of images on which I can train. Then instead of passing on the entire million images, I say that I will only pass a subsample, say a sample of 1,000 images. The good thing is for each batch, the neural network will learn and optimize the loss function, and then it will be exposed to another batch, and it can then it will already have learned from the previous batch, and then can adjust based on the new batches, and that will give you a much more generalized output rather than and this kind of takes care of the overfitting problem. Overfitting is when it's your data is your algorithm is performs very well to your training data, but when you expose the algorithm to some outside data, it doesn't do that well because it's like overtrained on your training data. That's what overfitting is. So batch size kind of takes care of the uh, the this overfitting problem. The next thing is epoch. So I mentioned here that there to learn it makes one forward pass and then one back propagation. So that is one epoch, one iteration. So if you say 50 epoch, then this forward and backward pass will happen 50 times. So your network will have 50 iterations to learn and minimize this loss function. So that is what an epoch is. Um, that's most of the hyperparameters that we will be covering in the tutorial, but there are others also like dropout and regularization. Regularization is same as what you use in linear regression, where you adjust the weights and try to take away unwanted features from your network. Dropout is like you can say that in each layer 20% of your feature is dropped out, or in each iteration 20% of your features are dropped out. So that way, that reduces overfitting problem also. We will see dropout and regularization, but I'm not going to go into details with that. So that's pretty much covers the neural network portion. Next, we will move to Keras. There are many framework, actually not many, but I should say several framework like PyTorch, TensorFlow, Keras that are popular for developing these deep neural networks. Keras is one of the a clean and easy way. It's actually based on TensorFlow and Theano, and it's much easier if you are a first time user compared to TensorFlow and I think PyTorch also. So Theano is a Python library which is used to evaluate any kind of mathematical calculation that involves multidimensional arrays or matrix. And as you know, for an image, a computer sees an image as an array or a matrix. So Keras is it's based on Theano, and the other is TensorFlow. TensorFlow is the most popular open source library for machine learning and deep learning. It's developed by Google only, and it's very popular. But as if most of you are a first time user, then it's kind of difficult to get used to TensorFlow. So for this session, we will be using Keras. The other thing is Google Colab. If you are not familiar with Google Colab, I will show you how to use Google Colab. It's an excellent free cloud service that has been developed by Google. It supports only Python, both version 2.7 and 3.6. It doesn't support R, and it's based on Jupyter Notebook. I'm not sure if in your previous session, if anybody used Jupyter Notebook. So when you are writing these codes and all that, Jupyter Notebook is very popular among data scientists and data analysts because you can visualize the data right there. You can visualize. It comes with great visualization and great tools also. So that makes the data analysis much easier. And the great thing about Google Colab is it comes installed with most of the required libraries and modules that you need for your machine learning and deep learning development. If you want to set up one in your local system, you can definitely do. But you would have to install, say, Python, Anaconda, then all the required libraries and modules. It might take you an hour to just set up everything. So if you want to get a hands-on experience, it's excellent to get started with Google Colab. I have provided the link here. Let me share the link in the chat also. Okay. Click on this link. Hello. Does anyone has any question, or otherwise please mute your mic?
No, ma'am.
Sorry.
No, ma'am.
Okay, let me just, yeah. So I've shared the link with everyone in the chat. Please click on that link. I'm also going to share a link for this data for this session. Please click on that link that has all the data that you would need for this session. And go once you go there in your drive, it will be shared with me. You right click on that folder and add a shortcut to your drive so that it will move from shared with me to your own drive. And there you will have a CSV file with the training data, test data, and a list of images, and then the code that we will use in this session. So this is Google Colab. You can sign in using your Google account. That's why in the beginning of the session, I mentioned to use is to set up a Google account if you don't have. It's an excellent resource to have. It provides free GPU. GPUs are expensive, but Google Colab provides it for free. It comes with a pro version also that is better than the free version. Let me see if anyone has any questions. Which link is not working?
Both links are working, ma'am.
Both links are working. Okay. So Nitin, both the links are working. Please check.
Ma'am, I think so. Zero Drive is not working. I just opened and it come back to the same link.
Which link is not working?
Dataset.
This drive?
Yes.
It's working in my case. I have already downloaded datasets.
Yeah, I think it's working. Just double check it. See if you are signed into Google or not, because I have set it as anyone who has the link could view this data, and right click and add the shortcut to your drive. So this is the Google Colab. I hope everyone is able to see. You can if you see, they have some sample codes. These are the cells where you can write your code. You click run. For example, here it is calculating number of seconds in a day. Sorry, I'm not connected to any session. Let's do that. Once you go to Google Colab and go to this drive, open this notebook. Okay. Open this notebook in Google Colab. And here, go to this top section here. If you are not able to see the top section, maybe you have hidden it. So just toggle this thing here and you should be able to view these bars here. Go to runtime.
Ma'am?
Yeah?
Ma'am, can you share the link once again? Because I've just on my laptop and I was listening on mobile.
Okay.
Can you share the link once again?
Yes. Sorry.
Thank you, ma'am.
So this is the link for the data, and this is the link for the Colab. You can sign into Colab using your Google account. Let me turn off my camera, if just in case the internet is flaky. So I hope everyone got the link to the Colab as well as the drive. In the drive, open up this code part, copy of plant disease classification. Okay, and here you go to runtime and change run type. Let's select GPU. Okay, here in the hardware accelerator, select GPU and say save. That would connect you to a session. Sometimes, because this is on basis of queue and priority, a lot of people use Google Colab. So sometimes it won't allocate you a GPU because it's free of cost. So you might have to sometimes go back and forth. That's why I said add it to your G Drive, because then you can run this single code and the data will be available here. So let's move on to the tutorial actually. So a brief about the Colab. If this is the Colab, this is your cell where you can write code. In the welcome page, you will have many resources. How you can, as I mentioned, it's based on Jupyter Network. So you can visualize your data here only. And it's excellent. They have some basic resources about machine learning and data science, and you can go through them. We will in this session see a hands-on example of how to build a neural network to classify these plant diseases. The plant diseases we have is apple. Let's start loading the data. So to load the data, this is the code, which is actually, I am just importing the drive here. So there is a file section here. They have provided some sample data on which you can practice your machine learning or Python coding. But we want to use the data that I have provided. So run this code. Run anyway. And it will ask you to go to this URL, sign in through using the account which you are using in the Colab also. And here there will be a code. Copy this code, go back here, paste the code here, and hit enter. So what it will do is it will load your drive here. So if I refresh this, now you see I can see my G Drive, Google Drive. So now I can access the data that is in. Now I can access the data that is in my Google Drive. Okay, so that's the first step in this code. This will make it easier, because if we get disconnected sometime, and if you get disconnected during the session, don't worry, all the codes are here. I have already shared with you. I will also share the presentation. I will add the presentation also to the same drive later on. You can run it later on. If you get disconnected, go back, connect here, choose a runtime with a GPU, change runtime type, use the GPU. You will need GPU to train your images. Hello. If you don't have any question, then please mute your mic. And so the next thing is we will be importing important libraries, including Keras. So there are many libraries, pandas. If you walk through the basic of in the Colab, and you might have seen in the previous session, it's a very commonly used library for data manipulation and like data analysis, viewing array data and all that. So these all libraries maybe not all, but most of them we would be using later on. So just hit run here. that will import all your important libraries. Once it stops, once if the you would get to know that this has finished running with this green check here. Okay. So that has import. We have now all the important libraries. Now start loading the data. So first we will mention the image path. So the image path is in my drive, plant disease folder images. As I mentioned, if you haven't added the link to your my drive, this will throw you an error. So make sure you right click on this folder and add a shortcut to the drive. So this is the folder name, and this is now available in your my drive. And because we in the beginning mounted the Google Drive, so it is available here. And in this folder, there is an images folder in which you have all the images. Then the test path is the test CSV file, and train path is the train CSV file. This is the path of the file. To run the file, to load the file, we will run this thing. PD is pandas dot read underscore CSV, which is like to read the test file and the train CSV file. So this is the training data. In the training data, if you see, there is an image ID and it mentions whether it is healthy, whether it has multiple diseases, whether it has rust or scab. So wherever it is 0, that is not true. Whatever is 1, that is there. So in the image folder, if you find an image with train underscore 0, that has scab. It's an image of a scab leaf. Train underscore 1 is an image of a multiple diseases. So forth. In test data, if you see, you only get IDs of the image. So actually, I have taken this data from Kaggle. I will show you at the end of the session. It's an open source platform where people share data, and then data scientists and AI people can go and participate. They sometimes have competition, and they give you this training data and test data. You can train your model, then send your output in the test data. The one who has best wins it. So that's why you don't see any results here, because this was for a test purpose. We will mostly not use test data. We will use the training data to train our model. So that's that's just to visualize a sample of your training and test data. Here, I want to see what is exactly the size of my test data. So your train data has 1,821 rows, which means there are 1,821 training images, and there are 5 columns. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because it has labeled healthy, multiple disease, rust, and scab. Whereas your test data, you only have single column, which is just the image ID. Okay. Now let's start some exploratory data analysis. Let's start visualizing the data. So this is a function that I've written to, actually, like a lot of these functions I have borrowed from Kaggle solutions. When I will share the link with you, you can go and also use some of these functions. So these functions help you to, load an image, and then you can visualize it here. So first run this function. So every time in Python, a function will be starting like this from def. And then you define what does the function does. And you create a function when you want to use that repetitively, so that I don't have to write these codes multiple times. So this is like a sample image I have loaded. This looks like scab disease. You all are from agriculture background. I hope you would have a better idea. But this kind of looks like a scab disease. Next thing, let's start to see, explore how the red, green, and blue channel are distributed in our data. So this code is actually for that, and it gives you the distribution of red, green, and blue channel. And if you see the green values, the green channel has a higher value, which makes sense. It's a leaf data, and so that's why we have more of these green channels. So this is a colored image So as I mentioned, you will have 3 different channels there. Uh, um, and now I have written, this is here a sample function to visualize leaves based on the condition. So we can visualize healthy uh, rust and scab diseases. So first run the function. If you don't run the function and run the next line, it will throw you error because it will be like, we are using visualize leaves function. It will be like visualize, what is visualize leaves? It will throw you some error. So I'm not using the function for multiple disease because I'm only using the first, a small sample of the training data. And the way this code has been written, it needs at least 6 samples. So in the first 25 sample, we don't have that many multiple diseases. So this function will throw error. So for multiple diseases, I have written a separate code, and you can then visualize some multiple diseases. I see clear rust here and maybe slight scab, I'm not sure. This, you can click this to, you can pass on the condition column that you want to visualize healthy leaves. So these are examples, some sample healthy leaves that you could see. You can click here to visualize. I had already tested, like you might see in the code section that most of these codes have been already, I have already run those codes. So you will already have the output there only. So these are rust. So rust is, you can classify rust as like, they are like rust colored circular spots on the apple leaves. Some have more versus others have, if you see here, like, you have very few spots. But in some it's very prominent rust. Similarly with scab, yeah. So with scab, you see some yellowish brown spots all across the leaf. Scab is also a very common apple disease, and I think in last 2 years it has become a problem in Himachal Pradesh. It had disappeared for a while, but now it's back again due to weather change or whatever. So this is a sample scab. And multiple diseases is a combination of both rust and scab. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, like a limitation of neural network is like, it needs a lot of data. We have some 1800 images, but if you see, we have multiple classes here. We have healthy, rust, scab, and then multiple diseases. There are 4 classes. So for each class, you should have enough data so that your algorithm could learn better. Okay, yeah. So here, let's see the distribution of different classes. So if you see, pretty much healthy, scab, and rust, we are sort of equally distributed, but we have very, very few example of multiple diseases. And that kind of makes sense because all these diseases have a different time and season, and it's sometimes very difficult to capture or have multiple diseases on a leaf. So most probably, if I'm like, for the sake of this tutorial, I will use the entire data. But if I'm going to use this data in real life, I will remove multiple diseases as a class. There is no point because there is very less data for multiple diseases, and your algorithm won't be able to learn, and it will just confuse the algorithm. So I would just remove multiple diseases and focus on either as healthy and diseased or healthy, rust, and scab. Here, let's see, this code, it will display you the distribution of healthy and like healthy and non-diseased plants, because there are 3 different disease classes: rust, scab, and multiple. So you have more number of unhealthy leaves versus healthy leaves images. If I'm not sure if anyone, how to visualize graph. Just you have to run this code to visualize the graph, but make sure you have run the previous codes also, and also make sure you are connected in the runtime. You go and change runtime, and you are connected to a GPU here. You can go and change the GPU here. And run all these codes sequentially. Otherwise, you won't be able to visualize this graph because they all are sequentially. You need some previous function or codes to run the codes in this cell. So just don't go and run the graph as a first step. Go sequentially. I hope that answers your question. Okay, so this is pretty much an overview of your data. You can visualize more of your data. You can explore further what's the different size of your data, if they are of the same size and all that. But for the sake of this session, we will just go through this. Just click OK or ignore it. It's that shouldn't be a problem. Because this code has been created by me, so it might just ask you, but that it shouldn't stop you from running it. So just click cancel or click OK. I think I did it in the beginning of the session. I don't remember what it was. Okay, thank you. Fine. So this is a basic exploratory data analysis. Next, let's start creating our training data. So we have all the images, but as I mentioned, we need to convert the image to an array because a computer sees, it just cannot read an image. It needs to read the array. So this is a code where a function. So as I mentioned, def load images. So what it does, it takes the image and it converts into an array. And I resize it to a 300 by 300 pixel. The larger the data size, the more it will take to train. You can further resize it. That is something you can test also. Is 300 by 300 required, or you can further reduce the size. So what I do is I make all the image to the same size, and it's really important that all your images should be of the same size, and it should be these neural networks, they want a square image. So make sure you make your image square. So this code here does that. Okay, great. I'm glad you're able to see the results. Okay, now here what it does is it goes through the train data, the CSV file that you have. It takes the image ID and match that image ID to the image path and create an array. So this will actually take a lot of time to run because you will be loading 1,821 images and converting into an array. I think it will take at least 10 to 15 minutes. So that's why I've already pre-run these codes. You all can start running it. Hopefully by the end of the session, both your train and test data will be loaded. So going forward, I won't run these codes because otherwise it will we will go over time. But here I have just loaded all the train images and it gives me the shape of the image. I cannot share the authorized code. You have to click on the URL, go to that link and copy that authorized code. The authorized code that I use wouldn't work for you. You have to use your own authorized code. So if this is not clear, let me run this one again. So you click here, okay. Okay, the drive is already mounted. I cannot redo it, but it will give you a URL here. Click on that URL, go to that link, sign into the same account that you used, that you're using for your collab. Then it will give you an authorized code. Uh, is has is anybody here been able to load their drive? What is the error that you are seeing? Can you copy paste the error? This you would have to use your own authorized code. So authorized code is to authorize your drive to here. Like if I give you my authorized code, it will load your drive, my drive to your system, and I don't want that. I don't want you to see my drive. Don't share your authorized code with anyone. No, this is the most input in file not found. Lalita, you might not, there could be two things. Either that data is not added to your drive. Make sure you have gone here, right clicked, and click on this thing, add shortcut to drive. And secondly, your Google Drive should show up here. Run this, copy paste the authorized code, click on refresh. You should be able to see the G drive. If that hasn't happened, you won't be able to run the test data. Or you can, you would have to click here on upload and upload all those data here. That will take a lot of time. This is a quick way to do this. I hope that solves the issue. Okay. So yeah, so here, okay, see Lalita, I think it's maybe you missed some part of the session. That's why it is working for Jackson. You can message Jackson, if how he did it. So yeah, so here if now if I have loaded all my train images, and it's an array, as I mentioned, it's the size of 300 and by 300, and it has 3 channels RGB. So now that's why the shape of all the images, like we have 1821 images and 300 into 300 into 3 features, which is like what, 27 followed by 4 zeros. That makes it 270K features. That's a huge feature, and it's a huge size. So that's why this will take some 10-15 minutes. Don't worry. Yeah.
No. Yeah, just out of the topic, I would like to ask one thing which is confusing to me, but might be it will help me out in coming future.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to know that whenever the programmer created the whole code and all, and we the practitioner will adopt that code. So how you improve your this train underscore, then how you improve and how you come to know that this will be the appropriate code for this, because we keep on doing new experiment. For that you have to change new code. How you become to have command on this?
With practice. Everything, it just takes practice. The more you code, the better you get. If you with Python, the excellent thing is that there is lot of resources available online. If suppose you are stuck somewhere that you have an image, how to load an image, if you just Google it, load images Python, you will find lots of solutions out as out there. Initially, it's just trial and error. There are certain forums like Stack Overflow, where the best solution gets the highest vote. So when you are a beginner, you can just pick the best solution and use it. But with time, you should know why it was as the best solution. You optimize also. By optimization, I mean, for picking this function. Before this, I wrote a lot of bad functions, which used to take more time because the way the iteration happens, there would be somebody who is a better coder than we will have a better code to load images, which will be much faster than what I've done. So that just comes with practice. So
Yes,
that's
yes, yeah.
that's why I want you all to introduce to
Okay.
Google Colab, because now you have a forum where you can practice your coding, and you will improve with time.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So this will be always with us. This practice session, what you are doing,
Yes,
or
yes.
you are going to
You
delete it.
I might delete it in future. I cannot guarantee that because the drive has a limited space also.
Okay.
So just save it to your drive. You can download it and save
Okay.
this to your drive. Then you will have it forever. Okay,
Okay.
until you delete it.
Okay. 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 Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you very much. So yeah, that was one thing, because we as a beginner, we always have confusion, and sometimes there are cases where the code which is given by one expert is not applicable to one system, and it happened to many program, and it doesn't work in my this one data surface, and that's why I'm this one curious to know that how this all command on the code is very this one accurate for you, for the expert.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I will share Kaggle in the end. There you will see a lot of other
Mhm.
codes also. But you can start
Mhm.
exploring Kaggle also. You will see a lot of tutorials there on data exploration, data visualization. And the more you learn, the more
Mhm.
you practice. And Kaggle is also a combination of Kaggle also provides a notebook, a free notebook there. So a combination of Kaggle,
Okay.
Google Colab, just practice as much as you want, and we all learned that way. Uh, okay,
Okay. Thank you very much. I will wait for that last moment also.
okay,
Yeah,
great,
kindly continue. This is interesting. Thank you very much.
yeah,
Uh,
okay. So next we load the test images. We will use maybe one or two test images in the end to see how does our neural network perform. So as I said, I'm not going to run these. This will take a lot of time. It took for me, I think both of them took close to 20 to 30 minutes to load all these images. So I'm just going to skip, but you have all the results and output here. And I would encourage you all to run. Until unless you don't run, you won't run into errors like how Lalita ran into an error, and then you can work with other uh, participants and try to solve it. And usually with Python, the error is very easy to comprehend. Like for example, Lalita said the error was file not found. So it was easier for me to debug it. I mean, if the file is not found, there could be two things: that file is not available because your G drive is not loaded, or you haven't added this folder to the G drive. So that's the part of debugging. Like it will throw you an error, and you have to see read the error and try to understand what could be the problem. Okay, so next is we decide we pass on the input size. So as I mentioned in the beginning, that we are resizing all the images to 300 by 300 pixel. This is a colored image. So there are three different channels. So the total input size will be 300 into 300 into 3. So here image width is image height are variables I pass, and I pass it as 300. The reason in the coding, you will see that we use variables instead of absolute numbers, because if I want to do another iteration and I want to change this size of the image, then all I will do is change this value here and just run this code. It's much easier to go and change this value at one place rather than at every other place. Okay, so it's a good practice to use a variable instead of the absolute value. Okay, um, so The next thing is we resize all the image. We normalize all the images. So we divide all these images by 255. The reason we divided by 255 is, you remember, if in the beginning, let me just show you that. So I said that, like, these pixel, each pixel will have a value between 0 to 255, because each color is of 8-bit. 2 to power 8 is 256, but the value starts from 0, so 0 to 255. So what it does is, you might have taken images and different lighting, and that could impact the value in this pixel. Something that has been taken in a higher lighting will have a different value. Like, if for the same image, you can take it in different lighting and the pixel value will change. You can use the red tint, that will change the value also, the pixel value in the image. So when you are training for the same image, it could assign the different weights to that feature, because, like, that's how the algorithm learns. So this is the process of normalization. You divide it by 255. What it does, it reduces all the pixel value to 0 to 1. So that way, no feature will get, like, a feature will get a weightage based on its importance in predicting the output, not if it has been taken in, like, different lighting or all that. So if you run this, it will show you a sample, like, that for train image, show me uh, the first value of the first array of the first row of the first column of the first channel, and it will show you this value of 0.13, and all your array value between will be between 0 to 1. If you have used linear regression, you would be familiar with the concept of normalization. There are different ways you can do normalization, but there is, like, that this is whole z-score that you use, but we are using a simple normalization where we just scale down the pixel value to between 0 to 1. Okay. And next, we need to create a x input and y input. The x will be all your features and y will be the label of the features. So if you see here, what I'm doing, I'm using iLog. iLog is actually, I am sampling, I'm only taking columns 1 to 5. Remember, 0 is here. The columns in programming, all the coding starts from 0. So this is 0, which contains the ID of the image, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. So I say that just take these values. This is my y value, and it will be an array. It will say that image ID is actually belongs to class scat, because there is a 1 here. And in our output, we want the algorithm to learn that for this image, the y value will be close to 0 here, close to 0 here, close to 0 here, and a 1 here, close to 1 here. Okay, it might not be exactly 0, because, as I said, it's an optimization thing. It generalizes, but it should be close to 0. That's what the algorithm will learn. Not necessary index number. Index is different. 0 is the column 0. For index, you can pass. This is the index. If you want to see the index, you will write here, say, train data dot index. That will give you the index. It's different in different libraries that use. For pandas, index is not 0. It's your first column. If your first column is index, then yes, you will have 0 as the index. Okay, so what we do is, like, now we separate the y value. Okay, now if you in the previous session, for training any data, we split into training and validation. Some people call it testing, but testing is different. Validation is like, you take your training data, you maybe take 10% based on your data size, sometimes even 1%. If you have millions of data, then you will take only 1% of your data as validation. So your algorithm will run on the training data, and it will test on the validation data. It will see how well it performs on the validation data. That will give you the accuracy, and that will give you that each iteration how well your algorithm is performing. And you can see that how your algorithm is performing for the training data and the validation data. And test data is something that is completely outside your training data. Suppose in real life, if I have these images, I would run the training and validation. I will split into training and validation. Then once I'm happy with the result, I will productize this algorithm. Like I will run it in real life. If I have an app, every time a farmer upload an image, my algorithm will predict what kind of disease it is. That will be my test data. So then we go back and see that how well it performed in the test data. So we have scientists who then check the images that we have labeled, and they see how well my algorithm performed in the test data. That gives you an idea that in real life data, how well your algorithm is performing. Okay. So what I do here, there is a train test split function also, which you can use. But I'm just doing it manually. I am just taking the first 1638 rows as training data, and the remaining rows, 10% data for validation. So if you see here, you will see that the validation shape is 183 and the training shape is 1638. So we have 1638 images for training, and we will use 183 images for validation. And we have 270,000 features, or 270,000 features, because it's a 300 into 300 into 3 array. So there are like lot of images. Now we can start building our neural network. Oh, thank you, Nitin. Okay. So as I mentioned, you start with your layers. So in Keras, you can build a network. It's pretty easy. You use this sequential and you define each layer. Okay. So this is your first input layer. So I say in input dimension, the total inputs, the total 270,000 features for all these examples will be gone. And I would use an activation function of ReLU. As I mentioned, that it's a very popular activation function. And then I say that the output from this input layer, like the next hidden layer, it should have 32 neurons. Now 32 is not a magic number. I've just randomly taken a number 32. And if you see in practices, people use it in multiple of 8s, as I had mentioned in the beginning. And then I add another layer to it, like these 32 neurons will pass on the information to this layer, where these neurons will they will have their own assigned weights and everything. And again, I will use an activation function of ReLU. And I will then the next layer will have 16 neurons. So that will be my hidden layer 2. Okay. And then this is my final output layer. Okay. And the reason I'm saying it has 4 units, because we have 4 classes: healthy, multiple diseases, rust, and scab. So that's why I have assigned it a 4 unit, because we need 4 output. That whether it's healthy, what will be the likelihood of healthy, what is the likelihood of this image being multiple diseases or belonging to rust and scab. And as I had shown in the array, it will say if it's a scab, then the value for that will be close to 1, whereas for rest it will be 0. And because it's a multi-class, remember in the slide I had shown that use softmax. We will use softmax activation there. And this is, I named this as model 1. So this is the architecture of your model. Now you compile this model. You decided the architecture, how many layers you will have, how many neurons you want. Then you add other and what kind of activation function will be used in each layer. Then you define other parameters. So when I compile, I say I want to use the optimizer Adam. If you remember in hyperparameters, we had, where it is? Yeah, we have many optimizers. So I'm picking Adam. For now, I am using the default learning rate. And for loss function, I want to use categorical cross entropy. So cross entropy is uh, actually is a very commonly used for classification problem. If I had only two classes, say healthy and disease, I would have used binary cross entropy. But because I have multiple classes, so I'm using categorical cross entropy. And for matrix, I can say that I want to check on the accuracy. There are different matrix. If you have used classification problem, then there is like F1 score, precision, recall. So based on what exactly your final output, you can define your. But in this case, accuracy works for me. Then this is how you compile these models. These are your layers, neurons, and you say use the Adam optimizer categorical cross entropy. So the other parameters will be default, whatever is the default that Keras uses. Then you can click on summary, and it will tell you that each layer, what is the shape going to be. So for your input, now you must be wondering how these parameters are coming into play. So we want the final output to be 32, like this from, yeah. So from input to here, I want 32. So there will be 32 weights that will be assigned to these features. And you have 270,000 features. So multiply 270,000 with 32. Then there will be 32 biases also. And then add another 32. So that will give you these number here, parameter number. So that's how many calculation will be happening in the backend. And it's crazy. But when you run this, you will see that this computer does these calculations like in seconds. And that's the beauty of using AI. These calculations, for us, for a human being to do would have taken days or maybe if not months. But the computer will do. That's the good thing about computer. They are not as smart as a human brain, but they are very fast in calculation. So that's going to be, this is the architecture of your neural network. Now, if you remember, we say that there were samples per batch. I say that, pass on 200 samples at a time and do these iteration 50 times, that forward and back learning, do this 50 times. You can do more. You can try 100, 200. Again, there is no magic number for this. This is a random number I have picked, 50. And then I do, this is all the parameters I decide. Now I fit this. I use the train data, X data, map it to the Y train. I mention the batch size, then I mention the validation data. And then I say the number of epochs, which is 50, and verbose. So verbose is, if you pass here 0, these messages wouldn't show. But if I write 1, I want to see from each step. That will show you how your model is doing. So I name this output as history model _1, just a variable to save it and to use it in future. So when you run this, you will start seeing that each step learning, you will see that the loss function reduces. As I mentioned in the first step, it will assign some random weights and biases. So you will have a higher loss, higher value. The error between the predicted and actual Y will be higher. And then it will slowly start reducing. In each iteration, it will go back, reassign the weights values, and you will see this loss function reducing. So this loss function and this accuracy. So 0.27 is actually a 27% accuracy, 32%, 26.06% accuracy. So this is for the training data. Then this is your validation loss. What is the loss that it is seeing in the validation data? So it will tell you, give you an idea that how your model is performing in the training data versus the validation data. Okay. Don't worry about these values. I have actually written a function here to display this data graphically. So same thing that you are seeing here in text, this function will then display it in the graph. So here you can see that how your loss is. So this is a decent optimizer. Remember, if I showed you a good learning rate and all, that a good learning rate should reduce like this. So this is like a decent learning rate that the model is following with epochs. And if you see after 30 epochs, there is no difference in the loss function, neither here nor in the validation. The loss function is little bit not the same as in the validation. And if you see, the accuracy is around 38% for validation data, whereas it is over 50% for the training data. So this is a classic example of overfitting, that this model has actually is performing better, like 20% better than the accuracy is around 20% better than the validation data. So if you show it any data outside the training data, it won't do good. And 55% accuracy is not good. But this is a very general model that we have built. So, I mean, I'm not expecting like, great accuracy here. I'm not surprised with 55%. But still, it's like, a 30 to 35% is still great. Like, if you pass on your data, then this model will be able to guess your disease, classify your disease with 35% accuracy. So next, I have just tried some parameters here. So I added another thing here like dropout, which is like, it's actually a trial and error. I will show you a better way to do these trial and errors. But yeah, the number of epochs, there is no hard and fast. There is no magic number I could give you that always try these many epochs. Better to start, yes, you can start with 10 and you can go up to 100, 200. There is an option that you can say that do an early stop. Once you don't see a difference in loss function, just stop early. No need to run up to 200 iterations, because that will take some time also. So yeah, this is all just trial and error. So what I say is at every iteration, drop 20% of the input data. If you see the images, like, some images might not be required in every iteration. So you can just remove some of those images, and this will be randomly, it will be removing. And rest, I have kept same, the layer architecture. I have increased the neurons here. So I have added one more layer. I have added one layer where I'm passing 64 neurons. Then there is another hidden layer with 32 neurons, then 16. So in earlier model, you only had these two layers. You didn't have this. So I have now an additional layer here. Plus, in the optimization, I say the learning rate to be 0.01 at this rate. And I then pass on a decay that after every epoch, reduce the learning rate by another 0.01. So it will be like starting with 0.01, then becomes 0.005, and it will keep reducing after every iteration. Okay. So this is a dropout layer. So there are no parameters. But here, if you see, the number of parameters has increased because I have increased the number of neurons. So now you will have 64 weights that will be assigned to this 270,000 inputs, and then plus another 64 biases. So that's what you're seeing here in the parameters. Okay. And then I run this model, and let's see how the model is performing. If it's better than the... Well, now if you see the training and the The good thing is like the overfitting problem is solved. Both the training and validation have similar accuracy, around 35%, but the accuracy is still not great. And for the validation, the loss function kind of, yes, after 10 epochs, again, I don't see a point of running after 10 epochs. Maybe you can run it up to 10 epochs. No need to run it 5 to 50. Okay. Another way of checking for taking care of overfitting is using this regularizer. So in each layer, I pass on the L2 regularizer and I assign it a lambda value of 0.01. Regularization is same as the linear regression, that it assign it kind of removes certain features. It costs the algorithm every time it selects assign a weight, higher weight to a feature. And we can run it again. I think everything else is same as the previous. It's just I've added a regularizer. Let's see the output. Again, the accuracy kind of is all 34 and 35. Yeah, very similar. The dropout anyways took care of it. The regularizer, I don't see any difference here. But if you can start seeing here, like if with higher iterations, there is the loss is kind of increasing. And here you might have to use more iterations. 10 might not be sufficient. Is there any question? Okay. No. Fine. So these are all the models now you have, model 1, model 2, model 3. So what I have done here is I've taken a sample test image. So this is the image. It looks like Rust, maybe Scab. Anybody has an idea? I think this is only Rust. Looks like a Rust disease. Then you can run these models and predict on this data. Okay. So as I mentioned, Scab is in the end. Rust is here. So what you would expect that these values should be close to 0 and the value for Rust should be close to 1. If you see the model 3, the performance is for multiple, it is okay, but it is kind of giving equal likelihood to healthy Rust and Scab. So overall, I won't call it a very good model. It's not doing its job. Say model 2, again, the same thing, giving equal weightage to healthy Rust and Scab. Here, model 1 is actually giving higher weightage to Scab and healthy, not Rust, so this is like the worst model. Compared to model 1, I think model 2 and model 3 are better in their output. But obviously, this is not sufficient enough. We cannot use this in production. If I use this model, my company will fire me. So in real life, actually, we never do these iterations manually. If you see, there are so many hyperparameters. It would be impossible to it will take me months to train a model. So in that case, what we use is this Bayesian hyperparameter optimization of hyperparameters. So I have shared this link here from this website, Analytics Vidya. I will share this PPT also with you. I will add it to the same plant disease folder. You can go and look into this, but to briefly tell you, this example is based on Keras only. So what it does is it pass on array for all the hyperparameters. So for example, for optimizer, it is saying that run all these optimizers, okay? And then for learning rate, it is passing an array for learning rate. Here this learning rate will be, the array is from 0.01 to 1. Similarly, for neurons, it is saying that use a neuron from 20 to 100. Activation also, it is saying 0 to 9 because these are the activations. So run all these different activations. And batch size 200 to 1000 again. And then epochs, as you mentioned, we can, here it is using 20 to 100, but you can use 5 to 100, 10 to 100, whatever. So what you do is you mention that these are all the possible permutation and combination, and you pass this Bayesian optimization and you say that fit the model, test on the validation data, give me the best parameter. So it will run. I'm not running it in this session because this will take at least an hour to run, because it will do all these permutation combination and it will give you the best parameter. So the best parameter, whatever matrix you have passed, if you have passed a matrix of accuracy, it will see which of these parameters give you the best accuracy. Okay. And then it will tell you that what is the best parameter, that use this batch size, use these many epochs, use a learning rate of these neurons, optimizer, whatever. So that will give you the final architecture of the neuron, easier to do. Okay. Another thing is, if you remember in the beginning, I mentioned that we don't have a lot of data. Usually these deep learning are very good, but they need a lot of data. Like they will at least need 10,000 data, but we only had some 1,800 data. So when you have less data, you can use something called data augmentation. I have provided a link, a small article, what exactly, but to briefly tell you, you can take some of the sample data and you can augment that. Like what you can do is flip those images, resize them, or change the lighting. You can just play around with those images and create more such data. You don't have to do it manually. Keras actually has a library called Image Data Generator. And in the code, I have imported that library, I think so. I didn't use it here. Yes, I have used Image Data Generator. So you can use Data Generator, and in this article you will see how to use that Image Data Generator, and it will generate some sample data based on your training data. But data augmentation is like, has its limitation, because it will be generating data based on your training data. Doesn't necessarily mean that it will cover all the use cases. So it's always better if you could get more data, but if you don't have, you can use data augmentation. Another thing is, you might have heard a lot about convolution neural network, CNN. So what I showed you is a very generic neural network, but computer vision uses CNN or different type of CNN only. So what CNN does is like you use a convolution layer. So, and this is an excellent article with it uses animations to show what is a convolution. So it will go through each pixel. It will take a 3x3 matrix, multiply it with an identity matrix, and what will do that it will reduce the feature. So it will convert a 3x3 matrix to only one single value. So what it does is so instead of in dropout, we remove certain features. In regularization, we are removing certain features. But when you have say 270,000 features, it's very difficult to know how to remove features. So with convolution, the excellent thing is that you reduce the feature size, but you don't remove any feature. You take the information from each pixel, just convert it into one. So here, if you see, it is taking this matrix and converting it to the value 4. So that is your convoluted feature. And then on top of it, it uses a max pooling, which is it uses another kind of a layer, a pooling layer. And it will go through, So with max pooling, it will take, you can pass on the layer. You could say 2x2, 4x4, whatever. Suppose I passed a max pooling layer of 2x2. If I'm using max pooling, it will take the maximum value from that feature, because something that has the highest value will have more impact. That kind of has the more importance in your output. Or you could, and this depends from cases to cases. Some cases, it will be better to take an average. that you might want to take. Suppose if you want to learn the texture, you want to classify on the basis of the texture, then it would be better to use an average rather than a max pooling. So that's CNN for you. I'm just going over because we have now very less time, but this is like very advanced topic. If you want, please go through it. And if I mentioned that there is another thing called transfer learning when you don't have a lot of data, and in most cases we never train. We cannot. It's maybe for some of you agriculture universities and who are working on plant pathology, you might have millions of images, but most of the researchers and AI people, we don't get access to millions of images. We at most get access to say thousands, if we are lucky, maybe 5,000, 10,000 images. In that case, what you can do is use transfer learning. I have provided the link. So what is transfer learning? That some network, neural network or CNN or some kind of deep learning algorithm has been trained on a huge set of data. Most of the features that are used in these images are similar, like the edges or the colors, difference in colors. So what you can do, that you can use a network that is trained on different, maybe something, it's better that it is trained on something similar. Say it has been trained on something plants, like, to classify whether it's a leaf or not. You can take that network, you can change the input and output value, and rest of the information in that feature space you can transfer to your data. And usually in these cases, if you use CNN or transfer learning, and there are many examples for the same data set, you will see that people are achieving an accuracy of 95 to 99% also, whereas we were achieving only 35% accuracy. You won't be able to achieve those accuracy just by using neural network. Maybe if you use these optimization and data augmentation, you can go up to 60 to 70%. I have tried it, but with CNN and transfer learning, you can go over 95% accuracy. Okay. And finally, I have provided the link to the Kaggle from where I have taken this data. Okay. And here is the problem statement. I have the data that I've shared actually is from here. You can sign into Kaggle. You can sign in using your Google account again. Here you have some sample codes. You can see this is where somebody has achieved an accuracy of 99%. This is an example of transfer learning. They have used an architecture called ResNet. And you can click on that. You can see their codes, how they are doing. They have used PyTorch, just to give you. They are not using Keras here. But you can do the same thing using Keras. Keras also has ResNet. And they have, here you can see that how they have done, what is the accuracy they have achieved. Kaggle is excellent if you want to practice on machine learning. There are some discussion and all that. Okay, I will add this to the, after I finish this session, I will add this PPT also, either the PPT or the PDF version of this to the link, the data set link. Okay, this is the feedback. Is there any question otherwise?
So I would like request participant. Do you have any query?
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah, hello.
Please.
You have taken this data from the Kaggle and you do some different coding that is entirely different from the Kaggle, or it's your own coding?
So you meant like the code that I shared, was it from Kaggle? Some of it are borrowed, some of I modified for the sake of this session. I think in Kaggle, because it's a competition, nobody will be using a basic neural network. unless
Okay.
they are doing it for education purpose. But I wanted to use a basic neural network just to give you all an idea about the basis of computer vision. Mostly you will see advanced codes there, like the CNN, the transfer
Okay.
learning. Okay.
Okay.
But those codes are open source. Just like if you are using it from Kaggle, and if you ever publish or something, you can always cite that source, give the due credit to everything. So that's why in the beginning also I said some of these codes I have also borrowed from Kaggle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Great.
So, would you like to elaborate something on CNN?
Would I like to
Elaborate on CNN?
CNN? Yes, I think I briefly. Do you have any particular question about CNN? So
Some particular application you would like to show.
Application. Well, I think CNN is very commonly used in most of the image classification. The image that I had built in the beginning, the algorithm that I was using in the beginning was also based on CNN, and I was achieving an accuracy of around 95% using CNN for the same.
For this problem.
Yes, for the same problem. Yeah, I had used CNN also. But then there are some better models that came up. There is, I think in Kaggle, I showed you an example. Someone has used ResNet. Then I use this transfer learning here that I'm talking about, which is like pre-built complex architecture. I just changed the input and the output there. And there I achieved an accuracy of 96, 97%. I never achieved an accuracy of 99%, unfortunately. But in Kaggle, I see that some people have achieved an accuracy of 99%. So you can go and see their examples, how they have done that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Research topic related to CNN and deep learning for agriculture. Actually, it's being used a lot in image classification for these plant disease classification. There is another database which actually consists of. I will add those papers here also to the same folder. Where there are multiple potato, grape, tomato. This was just one plant disease like apple, but in that paper they have used CNN and deep transfer learning to actually build on using it for a generic plant disease classification. And that's what is being used by if you're familiar with most of these apps like Plantix and all that, where you can take a picture and it will tell you what kind of plant disease it is. Usually they kind of use a general algorithm, but in some cases they use crop specific algorithm also. It depends from how good the application is. Thank you. I'm so glad you all liked and found this session to be informative. Are there any other questions?
Good morning, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, I was reading a research paper and they were talking about a hyperspectral image classification in which they were using the images captured by the satellite and then analyzing and classifying the plant diseases or the different problems related in the agriculture side. So could you please give some insights about where we could harness those popular databases which are using the images from satellite and then building the models?
Actually, the next session, the afternoon session, will be talking about hyperspectral, but though they won't be using it for plant disease, they are using it to identify and predict soil moisture, soil quality. But we are using at FASL, we use hyperspectral images for plant disease, but it's little different than here. So what hyperspectral does is with satellite, with you get like the reflectance, what the satellite measure, it doesn't capture an image because it won't be an image like what you are seeing here, right? So what it does is it captures the reflectance. In a hyperspectral, it captures the reflectance at different ranges of like infrared, visible range, and non-infrared. What are the reflectance that they are getting? So we get those data from the reflectance from that, and there are different vegetation indices that are used. A very commonly used vegetation indices is NDVI, which is like I think normalized vegetation index, something like that. So they calculate these vegetation indices, and that it is actually nothing but a different calculation of what is the reflectance in the visible range versus green range versus say non-infrared and infrared range. And based on that, there are different such indices. For plant disease, there are different indices, because for plant disease you will see the chlorophyll content, so maybe the reflectance from green range will be different. So there the disease prediction and disease classification happens based on that. Their computer vision is used for say cloud masking, which we also face this problem in India during monsoon. You have lots of clouds. Sometimes when there is complete cloud coverage, you don't get any satellite images. The problem becomes when there is partial cloud coverage. So during partial cloud coverage, what happens is like you get the images. The images, by images I mean reflectance, but they are they are not 100%, they are not accurate because you have partial cloud, so the reflectance passes through the cloud. So in that case, image computer vision is used to identify these cloud masking and removing the cloud mask value and getting the actual indexes. Recently we used an algorithm for that, and we will be publishing that work. When we will publish it, I will add, but if I will find any other paper, I will add to this folder also on hyperspectral image and disease classification. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank
I
you.
would like to request other participant. Do you have any query? The session is open for question and answers. I think there is no queries, ma'am. I think.
Okay. Great then.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much. I think this session was enjoyed by the participants. By seeing the chart box, they just given their feedback. I would like to request any participant, can you give oral feedback? So Mukesh, yes.
Ma'am, this is Dr. Parkavi from VIT Chennai.
Hello, Dr. Parkavi.
Yeah, really, I'm new to the computer vision field, ma'am. Really, the session is awesome. And the demonstration as well as the way you teach us, very nice, ma'am. Really, we got inspired much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other?
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, please.
I'm Dr. Jagdish Prasad Sharma. I like the way she teach the basics and illustrate the problem on that Google software, and overall illustration is very much fruitful for us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Hope thank you, ma'am. I think the session was very informative. Hope maybe participants also have given their opinion and feedback. Surely we'll have another coming years. We have different programs. We are happy to collaborate with you, ma'am. Already last year also you have. Yes, sir. Please, sir. May I know who is this? Sir, may I know?
Hello, I want to talk something.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Today's session is very wonderful and very informative. I want some information from Madhumita Miss. What are the latest research area in that field of agriculture, and how to utilize that deep learning and CNN? Can you suggest some ideas, ma'am?
Sure. I mean, deep learning is so I can give you some examples that we use at FASL, where we use deep learning. So we use deep learning to do weather forecasting. We used deep learning also for rainfall predictions also. If you ever visit, we have a blog article on Medium called FASL, and there you will see articles on how we are using images for rainfall prediction, radar images for rainfall prediction, then how we are using hyperspectral like satellite images for crop health assessment, then microclimate forecast. That's what FASL provides. That's where also we are using deep learning. Then these are the major areas where we are using deep learning, but it's not limited to here. Deep learning is being, in the next afternoon session, you will see how they are using deep learning for soil moisture forecast. You can do, deep learning is also used for price prediction, like, mandi price prediction for horticulture or agriculture commodity. The sky is the limit. You think of any problem. If you can bring the data, if you have enough data, then you can definitely use deep learning there.
Thank you, madam. It's a wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to add one thing, madam. Today, if you look out Times of India, one of the principal investigator also, they suggested AI for disaster management.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Today, just now, I just read that. I think that also valid things we have to add for research work. See, AI everywhere we can apply.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think thank you, madam, on behalf of FDP and on behalf of IAPM. Really, it's a wonderful session. Hope all the participants also given, and I think they got enriched knowledge exclusively what you have given in a practical way of explanation. Thank you very much, madam, once again. And of course, further we'll have more collaborative work and collaborative invite for you for guest lecture and offline lectures also.